Let's learn about greenhouse gases. The connections between the climate change issue and the forest products industry are more complex than for any other industry because through the forest products industry life cycle, carbon is both captured from the atmosphere and stored, as well as released to the atmosphere. This short-term carbon cycle for forest biomass is different from the one-way carbon transfer to the atmosphere associated with fossil fuels. And it is the reason why biomass carbon is considered to be cyclical or neutral, and thus a very low carbon source of energy. The biomass carbon associated with the paper-making process begins in the forest, where trees and soils capture and store a significant amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Trees are then harvested and sent to the mill for processing. During the manufacturing process, some of the forest biomass not needed for paper-making is burned for fuel, returning carbon to the atmosphere as biogenic carbon dioxide. As this biomass is burned, small amounts of other greenhouse gases are also formed and released. Essentially, all of the remaining carbon is transferred into the forest products made by the mill, where it is stored for periods varying from weeks to centuries. At the end of a product's life, its fate will determine whether it will release greenhouse gases in the form of methane from landfills, or whether it will help reduce these landfill emissions by being used as biomass fuel or by being recycled. The pulp and paper industry also burns fossil fuel as part of the manufacturing process. When trees are transported from the forest to the mill, a relatively small amount of fossil fuel-derived greenhouse gases is released to the atmosphere. During the manufacturing process, the largest amount of greenhouse gases is released to the atmosphere from fossil fuel combustion. Transportation of final products also releases some greenhouse gases from the use of fossil fuel. Let's talk about greenhouse gas trade-offs and co-benefits in relation to air emissions. The most greenhouse gas-intensive fuels also release the most sulfur oxides when burned. Therefore, switching from the most greenhouse gas-intensive fuel, coal, to the least greenhouse gas-intensive fuels, biomass or natural gas, will also reduce sulfur oxide emissions. In general, solid fuels are associated with higher particulate emissions than liquid or gaseous fuels. Therefore, switching from coal to natural gas would lower both particulate emissions and greenhouse gases. However, switching from coal to biomass, which would greatly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, may not significantly affect particulate emissions. Finally, switching from natural gas to solid biomass would significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but would increase particulate emissions. Let's talk about greenhouse gas trade-offs and co-benefits in relation to energy. Changing from burning coal to burning wood bark will achieve a reduction in greenhouse gases, but will consume much more energy, as more bark is required to produce the same amount of energy produced with coal. However, if coupled with combined heat and power, or cogeneration, energy savings can be made in conjunction with reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, as combined heat and power production is much more efficient than traditional energy generation. Finally, if we reduce greenhouse gas emissions by reducing energy consumption in general, this is a strong co-benefit with energy use. Let's talk about greenhouse gas trade-offs and co-benefits in relation to recycled fiber. Degradable materials in landfills create a significant amount of methane. These emissions can be reduced by keeping degradable materials out of landfills, either by recycling them or by using them as biomass-based fuel. How is the pulp and paper industry performing when it comes to greenhouse gas reduction? Carbon storage in forests can offset a significant fraction of life cycle emissions. Also, over the past 2 decades, there have been reductions in manufacturing-related greenhouse gas emissions. That said, there are opportunities for improvement in greenhouse gas reduction across the industry life cycle. The industry can focus on several areas, such as increasing carbon storage in forests, increasing carbon stored in products, reducing emissions in manufacturing energy, reducing emissions from end of life, and by reducing emissions elsewhere in society. For example, by producing energy from burning used paper products that are not economically recycled, or by exporting green energy from pulp and paper mills to the grid. To learn more about greenhouse gases and the industry's carbon profile, click on the links on this website.